Welcome to those of you who are watching online, and you're not here to know that it takes a crew of about 4 people to make this possible and 2 cameras. We're soon going to get one installed in the ceiling. This is a joke. So that I can do card tricks here and it will show up. I'm glad you're here, whether in person or online. So I don't see Corbin back there today, but Joshua and John and Tim for making this possible. So no matter who you are or where you are in your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. I'm pretty soon going to take this announcement out. There's a sign-up sheet on the table in the back, and also you can access this through the Ordinary Life website so that you can get the community newsletter that goes out once a month. That won't interfere with what you get on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but this is good. Okay. So I want to say just a word about this. We have over 210 people registered now. There's a few more capacity that could fit in this room. This is for the Saturday night event. And Dr. Jeff McDonald and I spent time with Nadia on Friday talking about the event. She's a delightful person, very personable and knowledgeable. And if you've been reading her website or following her feeds, you know something about her. She's inked. That's one thing. But she's really smart, very pastoral and prophetic. And so she let us know, because of her scheduling and her energy level, that if you expect a personal encounter with her, do that on Saturday night before she speaks here. So she'll be signing books that Brazos Bookstore will have here. And there'll be an arrangement if you want a photograph and all that sort of thing, signed book and that. But after the event on Saturday night, she will not interact with anybody. She's going to go. So anticipate that. She's not being rude. She just says, I put all my energy into doing something like this. It's a 2-hour event, and after I'm done, I'm whipped. And then she's preaching both services on Sunday. And that will be a dramatically different experience than you will have here on Saturday night if you have registered for that. Her preaching is very pastoral. Let me put that another way. Her language will be more pastoral during the sermons on Sunday than they will be on Saturday night. And then on Sunday during this hour, she and I are just going to talk and have fun, I hope. I offered, which I have done for, I think, every major speaker that we have ever had to one of these endowment lectures. I go to the airport, have a driver, go to the airport and pick the person up and try to distract them from the ugly parts of Houston on the way from the airport back to here. And I told her I was planning on doing that and would show her magic tricks and tell her jokes. And she said, thank you, no. I said, Nadia, you don't know what you're missing. And she said, I don't want to learn. So anyway, she's going to be here. It's going to be a great event. I'm glad that we are able to do this, and I hope that you are able to be here. So let's begin in silence. It's our way of acknowledging our intention to be aware that we live inside the heart of sacred mystery and that sacred mystery seeks to reside in us. We want to be present, to be open, and to be awake and honest during this time. So may grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be in our in and at our departing. May we come to know who we truly are. And may all creation benefit from what we do here. Amen. So, I have a confession to make. The phrase confession is good for the soul is not in the Bible. The first reference I could find is in a book of Scottish Proverbs in the 16th century. Nonetheless, I don't know a religious tradition that doesn't have some form of confession as part of its ritual. In the Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Anglican, Lutheran traditions, the act of confession is called a sacrament. The Jews have the Day of Atonement, which is not like that because the Jews believe that they confess their sin directly to God and not through an intermediary like a priest. But even in other religions that I know a smattering about, and that would be Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, some indigenous religions, Taoism, every one that I know has some form of facing up to shortcomings, failings, things that we would call sins. So I want to tell you a story about confession. A Roman Catholic priest was retiring after many, many years of serving just one parish. He had been appointed right out of seminary, and it was the only parish that he had served. He had served there for decades. He had become incredibly popular among the parish people. The parish had grown, the church. Parish means geographical area, so St. Paul's is not a parish church. We attract people from all over. But he became very beloved, and on his retirement, there was a huge event planned for his retirement. Lavish banquet, there's going to be entertainment, a variety of other things were planned. And a politician who had grown up in that church and eventually had been elected to Congress was going to come back for that banquet to make the presentation to the priest of the parish to express their appreciation for him. It was a big deal. It was a really big occasion. So the dinner part of the evening was over, and it was time to present the priest with a generous gift, and the politician was delayed. He was on his way, but he was going to be a few minutes late. So the priest decided that he would go ahead and say part of what he was going to say before the politician arrived. And so he got up and he said, as you know, this was my first appointment out of seminary. I'm so fortunate that Father Flanagan gave me a lot of instruction in my early years here. I'm fortunate in that this is the only church that I have served. So I have married people, baptized their babies. I have buried people that I have married. I have married people that I have baptized. I just appreciate this long history that I have had with you. I love you all. And not just you who are members of this parish, but I've come to love and appreciate the town where we are situated. However, I must confess that my first impression of this parish was not good. And I got it from the first confession that I heard here. And I thought after hearing that I had been assigned to a terrible place. The confession I heard was from someone who had not made confession in a long time. And he told me that as a teenager, he had stolen a television set. And when questioned by police, he had lied his way out of it. As time passed, he'd stolen money from his parents. He had embezzled from his employer, had an affair with his boss's wife, had sex with his boss's 17-year-old daughter. On numerous occasions, he had taken illegal drugs. He had had several homosexual affairs. He'd have been arrested twice for public nudity and even transmitted a sexually transmitted disease to his sister-in-law. I was appalled that one person could do so many awful things. I thought seriously about asking the bishop for another appointment. I was sure I could not stay here. But as the days went on, I realized that this guy was an exception and that you were not like this. And I had indeed come to a parish full of loving, thoughtful, generous people. Just as the priest finished his talk, the politician arrived, full of apologies at being late. And he went to the podium to give praise to the priest, thanking him for all he had done for the parish and the community. The parish was giving the priest a new car and an all-expense-paid trip to all the places in Europe that he had wanted to go. The politician began by saying, "You know, I'll never forget the first day our parish priest arrived. In fact, I had the honor of being the first person to go to him for confession." If only every politician. So here's my confession. I sometimes don't use my turn signal. No, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Although I have noticed since the pandemic that there are more jerks on the freeway than there used to be. Thoughtless people. And this is not my confession either. I'm deeply concerned about my country. I'm concerned about what's going on at the highest levels of our country. And here's my confession. I am convinced that we would not be in this shape if everybody saw things like I do. The problem is that people who don't see things like I do believe the same thing. So we end up looking across what seems to be an ever-widening, deepening chasm, saying to each other, "Why don't you get it? Why don't you see like I do?" So the title I have given this time today is Being Enlightened About Being Enlightened. But I wanted you to know that's just the purpose I gave the talk, for advertising purposes, to get you here. Because the real title is The Wisdom of Following Jesus. I'm hesitant to use that because of the way that Jesus has been, is being misused and abused, to the point that even progressive types are turned off, because traditionalists use Jesus as a tool and not a door to walk through to higher levels of wisdom and understanding. So I am talking about Jesus today, but I want to be clear that I'm not talking about Christian exceptionalism, because the religion associated with Jesus has all too often reinforced rather than challenged harmful behaviors and beliefs, and I understand that. And I'm also aware that there are other very positive examples in history that I could use. Almost any of the Hebrew prophets, particularly Jeremiah, Jesus used him a lot. There's Muhammad, the Dalai Lama, St. Francis, James Cone, Desmond Tutu, Dorothy Day, Sojourner Truth, Rachel Carson, Nelson Mandela. The list goes on and on and on of really great, outstanding humans. But in teaching about the wayless way, I'm drilling deep, maybe deeper than I have ever dug in my teaching, into the life and teachings of Jesus. So one of the basic things required to be on the wayless way is not only seeing, but being aware of how we see. So if you step into the world where Meister Eckhart's sentence, the way that I see, the eyes with which I see God are the same eyes with which God sees me. If you step into that world, if this sentence makes any sense to you, then you're on the way to understanding that we don't see well. Over and over, Jesus said to people, why don't you see? You have eyes to see, you don't use them. Why is that? You have ears to hear, you don't use them. Why is that? And I got to be honest, this is my confession, and maybe it's yours too. But regardless of what you may think about Jesus, every one of us thinks that the way we see things is the way they should be seen. That's why I say, if everybody saw like I did, we wouldn't be in this mess today. So the first thing Jesus does, at least in the narrative we are using, he calls people to follow him. And the aim that Jesus had was to get these people who follow him to see things differently. And he was going to give, by word and example, instruction about how to do this, so that they in turn could teach others how to see things differently, so that this would bring into creation what he called the kingdom of God. John Dominic Crossan says, the kingdom of God is what this world would look like if God ran the show. So, following the narrative created by Stephen Mitchell, this is what we've come to. And as he was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon, who became Peter, and his brother Andrew casting a fishing net into the lake, metaphor, into the unconscious, into God, whatever. And he immediately said to them, come follow me, and immediately they left their nets and followed him. And walking on a little further, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who were in their boat, mending their nets, and he called them, and immediately they left their father in the boat with the hired men and followed him. Now, it scares some people to hear that the Gospels we have are works of fiction. And yet, this is the way the world was at that time. Ancient biographies, like the ones we have of Jesus, were written long after the person had died. There was no hard historical evidence for anything that is in the Gospels. Stories that we have in the Gospels were based maybe on some historical memory, but many of the details had to be invented. And this is why there's no agreement in the Gospels about who the 12 disciples of Jesus were. You've got different listings in different places in the Gospels. The number 12 is symbolic because the Jews at the time hoped that what Jesus would be doing would be reconstituting the tribes of Israel. There were 12 of them. There would need to be 12 leaders, and the apostles were going to be those people. So this passage, and many others like it that we're going to encounter, are all about being called to follow Jesus and what it means to follow Jesus. Or to use the phrase that we're using, to follow the wayless way. Now, I believe, and again, I'm not preaching Christian exceptionalism. I believe that following Jesus can transform the world. And at the same time, I want this following to honor the sacred paths that people of other traditions also choose to follow. Okay? So in taking the particular path I'm taking, I would like to show what a difference the way Jesus followed makes. And I'd like to do it in a way that might intrigue and challenge people who've not yet decided to follow this path to do so. It's very evangelistic Southern Baptist stuff. So I'm not trying to teach a way to score points against others or a way to bend the Christian story to our preferences. Rather, I want to teach a way that shows us how to live. So there is a huge difference between being an admirer of Jesus and his teachings and following Jesus. Our ability to welcome the vulnerable, the disabled, the children, to speak the truth, to practice generosity, to honor the limits and holiness of human bodies, to live out of step with the world, to love our enemies, is the embodiment of an ethic that is born out of walking the wayless way. Now, you might or might not take comfort in the fact that the followers of Jesus, when the story was first created, were resident aliens. So when Jesus called people, he called them in a time when they lived in an authoritarian regime. Now, the country in which we live is moving more and more in that direction, as are many countries around the world. So what in this context does it mean to follow Jesus? Being Christian is not a matter of what one believes, but following the way Jesus lived. And I have another confession. If this is what it means to be a Christian, I may be one of the worst Christians you've ever met. However, my faith is that I can aspire to this. And my faith is that those who hear Jesus' words and act on them construct lives that are capable of weathering any storm. And that's comforting because, as far as I can tell, we're about to enter one. Now, before I'm done today, I'm going to come back to this kind of understanding of following Jesus. But here's another confession. I'm breaking a vow that I took in January. Sorry. I have been a follower of the writings of Brian McLaren for years. And when I first encountered him, he was, in my opinion, he's very much like Jim Wallace, the founder of Sojourners. He's an evangelical Christian who has an intense passion for social justice, particularly racial justice in America. So when I first encountered Brian's work decades ago, I would describe him as a social justice pioneer, but somebody who was to the right theologically. Okay? And over the years in his writings, I have watched Brian McLaren maintain that evangelical fervor towards social justice and move further into the left or more progressive field. So that now Brian McLaren is probably the lead teacher taking over the Richard Rohr Center for Action and Contemplation. So he's got good credentials, and he's a really great guy. I'd like to have him here sometime. So during the COVID pandemic, which is, we just had an anniversary, right? 4 years ago. 5 years ago. When the divisions in this country were becoming more glaring every day, and this is right after the Unite the Right rally that took place in Charlottesville. That was in August of 2017. Brian McLaren wrote 2 really accessible books. Now, these books are not available in print form, but they are available in e-format. And even if you don't have an e-reader, you can go online. There'll be a link to just go brianmclaren.net, and you'll find these books. One of them is called Why Don't They Get It? And it will be in a few weeks that I'm going to be teaching from the content of this little book. And then he wrote another book at the same time called The Coming Pandemic. These 2 books will cost you $9.99. I think it would be wonderful if 1 or 2 or 3 of you would say, hey, I'd like to start a study group in my neighborhood or at this time and take these 2 books and use them. We need to know the content of these 2 books. I bought them when they first came out, and then I got an email this week when I was working on this talk that they've just been revised and released in new editions. I downloaded them. I read them both in less than 2 hours. We're not talking about a heavy read here, something you can do easily. So one of them fits perfectly with what I was going to teach anyway, and the other we'll get to in some time. I'm going to give a very, very brief view of the book on authoritarianism today. We're not going to do it in depth. Please read these books. I know these are maybe the first 2 books I've really recommended this year. You may not agree with his conclusions, but in the back of both of these books, there are references to document his sources. So this is, he's not making this stuff up. Okay. So Brian McLaren got to wondering, as I did and have, and I got some insight into this when we were in Nuremberg, Germany years ago, some time ago. How was it that a society like Germany fell for Hitler? Theirs was a very advanced, intellectual, civilized country, and yet this cult-like group developed in that country where eventually it took over. It gained a majority, and where it didn't have a majority, many of those who were not in a majority kept quiet. Historical fact. So we were in Nuremberg and had a guide who took us to all these places. Germany at that time did not want to forget its history. It teaches its kids in school, this is what we did, so you won't do it. And the guide, who was an American but had married a German woman and lived there, said, after World War I, the Germans were broke. They were depressed. They had been defeated. They had nothing to look forward to. And this guy comes along and says, I can make you great. If you trust me, I'll take care of you. And their national anthem became one where Germany was going to be the number 1 country in the world. They changed their national anthem after World War II. I don't know if you've listened carefully to the words of our national anthem. We got bombs going off in the national anthem. All right, okay. I want you to read these books. And I bring them up for 2 reasons. First, authoritarianism is an epidemic in our country. Whether it will become a pandemic remains to be seen. An epidemic is considered smaller geographically and maybe easier to maintain or correct, and a pandemic is something that's global. So in the last couple of decades, there's been a move globally to countries going to the right. According to the research I did, the number of countries has risen from 13 in 2002 to 42 in 2022. It's the largest figure ever recorded, and it indicates the global trend toward authoritarianism. More countries are moving in that direction than in the direction of democracy. I never thought in my lifetime that I would see a public rally where Nazi flags were being waved in this country. I never thought in my lifetime that I would see a prominent public figure close to the President of the United States doing what looks very much like a Hitler signal. I never thought in this country that I would see an anti-science movement. But it's here. I mentioned a few weeks ago that I grew up with the scourge of polio. I had classmates when I was in grammar school who got polio and died. The vaccine against it came out, and over time, not immediately, there grew an awareness that to defeat this virus, the effort needed to be global. And it became so. My father was very active in the Rotary Club. And the Rotary Club, civic organization, committed itself to use its connections around the globe to advance education and dissemination about polio and polio vaccines. And they took on defeating polio as their goal. And in 1979, that's not that long ago, polio was eliminated in this country. Other countries, not so much. Africa was declared free of what's called the wild polio virus in 2020, not that long ago. Effective measles vaccines came online in 1968. Prior to the measles vaccine, measles was the leading cause of death among children. Now, this is in the late 50s and 60s. And now, not only is measles making a comeback, but just this week, I read this. I'm putting this up here because you would think I was making it up otherwise. This is in a newspaper. A Texas pastor, let's just stop right here. Why is it that when something absolutely ignorant and stupid, and they're not the same, comes out of some religious person or politician's mouth, they're always from Texas or Tennessee? A Texas pastor is facing criticism for boasting that his church's private school has the state's lowest measles vaccination rate. Pastor Landon Schott praised Mercury Culture Preparatory in Fort Worth for its 14.29% kindergartner vaccination rate, attributing it to families embracing freedom of health and rejecting government science projects. His comments come among a Texas measles outbreak that has already killed one child and sickened dozens more. Okay. So it's important to know about authoritarianism. It's a growing reality in our time and nationally. It's with us. And the second reason it's important to know about it is it's the context in which the Jesus story, teachings, gospel started and got disseminated. We're not the first. Nazi Germany was not the first. Rome had it down perfect. So with our experience of globalization and communication, I don't think it's even possible for us to comprehend what the world was like in the time of Jesus. The vast majority of people, even if they were Jewish, lived under Roman domination. 3%, if that many, of the population could read. The world was flat. All right? God had something, if you were Jewish, God had something to do with everything that happened. God made it rain. God made the crops prosper. God caused sickness. God was involved in everything. If you were not Jewish, Caesar did. What irritated the Jews and Romans when the gospel of Jesus got being proclaimed is they said, no, all the titles that you have given to Caesar, we're going to take over and give to Jesus. They did not execute Jesus because he talked about love. He was a political upstart. Now, when I was first studying this in the university and in seminary, I was taught that one of the things that made Christianity possible was what was known as the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, right? And it was presented to me as this peaceful era. No, the peace of Rome was accomplished through absolute violence. When Jesus was 12, 13 years old, 3 miles away from where he grew up in Nazareth in Sepphoris, there was a community that rose up against Roman domination, and the Romans crucified 2,000 people in one day in that community. Jesus had to know this. It was the gossip. It was a peace that was maintained through violence. So how does authoritarianism work? And McLaren has given 4 marks of a totalitarian government. Now, there have been totalitarian governments since the Akkadian Empire that was almost 3,000 years before Jesus, so not a new thing. But using data from what we call the modern era, the marks of authoritarianism are this. Authoritarianism is a process of centralizing power in one individual or one party, and it has 4 symptoms, according to McLaren. And he documents this stuff. The first one is fear. Authoritarians rely on fear, whether it's real or concocted. They have to have an enemy. And again, if the enemy is a made-up enemy, that's even better. Shared hostility unites people. And imaginary enemies are just better than real ones. I was driving to a funeral yesterday to conduct a funeral. And on NPR, I heard that because of fear of DEI, Arlington Cemetery, where those who served our country, and many of whom died doing so, if they were black, Hispanic, or female, they have now had their places of prominence removed from the Arlington Cemetery. I get seminary and cemetery mixed up all the time. Interesting Freudian slip there, right? So they've had all those removed from their website in places of prominence. If you do a search, you can still find them. But for example, Colin Powell, who became our first black Secretary of State, gone. This United States, gone. The next thing that authoritarians do is create division. They use it to split communities or societies into in-groups and out-groups. And if one doesn't show loyalty to the leader, that person is expelled, censured, or whatever. The third mark is distortion or distraction from the truth. Intentional misinformation is used to keep the in-group united. So news organizations are threatened, sued, journalists are jailed, killed. Education that encourages critical thinking, or more importantly, distorts or hides historical facts, is just taken out. And you are aware that in Texas text school books, influence much of what goes on in the United States. In these textbooks, the history of slavery is taken out because the reasoning is we don't want to embarrass the children, and that means white children. And then there is the suppression of dissent. Protests, peaceful or otherwise, are seen as things that should be eliminated. And one way of doing that is to characterize protesters as looters. They're violent, they're alien, they're undesirable in some other way. Now, how is this possible? Because I look at this and I look at what's going on in our country, and I think, why doesn't everybody see this? And the answer, says McLaren, and again, his sources are as solid as can be on this, is that we see things because of the biases we bring to what we see. Every day, and these days it seems I pray it more than once, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's a great prayer. Bob Hilligus recently sent me a redone revision of this prayer, which I think I like maybe even more. It is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know it's me. Now, I don't know about you, but my easy temptation is to flick attention to somebody else rather than myself, to what they're doing wrong rather than how I can respond. I do that because I get into my fear part of my personality. I get scared and I get reactive. So the question becomes, why can't I see? What am I not seeing? And the reason that we don't see is the same reason that Jesus' followers didn't see. We're biased. Now, in his brief book, McLaren lists 13 biases, and they affect every one of us. Nobody is exempt. There may be a few highly evolved people who see. I'm not one of them. We see through, mostly. And we see through a wide variety of lenses that keep us from seeing what is. People in recovery call this denial. Now, the biggest contributions to people not seeing are religion, politics, and nationalism. Because these organizing principles don't teach people how to see, they teach people what to see. Some people see only Christian. Some people only see Catholic Christian. Some people only see Jewish. Some people only see Buddhist. Some people only see Republican. Some people only see Democrat. Some people see American. Some people see French or German. And each person thinks that the way he or she is seeing things is the way they are. Now, suppose that just outside this door here, there's a library. It's a great library. It's not overwhelming, but it has everything you need in it. It has fiction and nonfiction. It has reference book. It has biographies. Everything is in that library. And let's suppose that I gave one of you the task of going into that library. You have 5 minutes. I want you to count the spines of every book in that library that are blue. Okay, you got 5 minutes. Now you can imagine yourself going in the library, you come back, and you give an answer, and you know what? You're probably going to be somewhere in the ballpark of being correct. But if after you got back, I say, that's great, how many red spines did you see? You wouldn't know because you weren't focused on red spines, just on blue. One of Sherry's favorite cities in the world is Barcelona. and we've been there several times. And after our first time there, she said, I want to go back and have an extended time in Barcelona, so we did, in Catalonia. This is great. And the second time we were there, more extended time, I got to know one of the people who was staying there, who was also from Catalonia. And I asked him the typical American question. What do you do? And he said, I hang out with my friends. I go on picnics with my family. I like to windsurf. I go to the cinema. That was not what I was asking. So I said, no, I mean, what do you do to live? By this time, he had caught on. He's a smart guy. By the way, people who speak 3 languages are called trilingualists. People who speak 2 languages are called bilingual. People who speak 1 language are called Americans. But by this time, he caught on, and he said, oh, what do I do to live? I breathe. I eat. I sleep. I go for walks. And then he said, this is the difference between you Americans and us. Here, we work to live. There, you live to work. It's a bias. I slapped him. No, I didn't. I thanked him. Our existing belief system just excludes what doesn't fit. And we don't do this because we're ignorant. We do it because it's easier. It's more comfortable. It's more comfortable to live with things that fit what I already know than something that requires me to think or maybe to get acquainted with somebody else. That's hard work. So in our country, people on the right tend to watch Fox News. People on the left tend to watch MSNBC. And I mean no offense to anybody or to either of those organizations. But if that's where you get your news source, you are not getting news. You're getting what the people who program the ads think you need to hear. That will get you back. Confirmation bias is the most effective way to go on living a lie. I'm fairly certain that today, maybe in this room, if I were to say something negative about Donald Trump, or if it still was relevant, if I were to say something negative about Kamala Harris, some people would take it as a personal insult. That's our bias. Now, how did Jesus deal with this? That's what we're talking about, Jesus, right? So Jesus dealt with confirmation bias by immersive experiences. He did it through parables. He did it through acts that he did. He did it with open encounters that he had with people his followers considered other. Now just think about this. The Jews, poverty level, no power, eking out existence, had one of their members who collaborated with the Roman government to get taxes from them, which that person usually kept some portion of, and then gave the rest to the Roman government. And that person, called a tax collector, was hated by the Jews. Hated by the Jews. So what did Jesus do? He called a tax collector to be his disciple. We call him Matthew. We don't work that way in this country. Jesus does. And he calls us to follow him. There's a difference between seeing Jesus as a great teacher or even holding it that the belief you have in Jesus somehow saves you. There's a difference between that and actually following Jesus. Jesus' teachings are intended to produce a shock within our imaginations so that we come to see ourselves and others in a radically different way. Jesus' teachings are not about our being better people, but rather are to help us see something so new, so against what we have always heard, that we cannot rely on our older images of what is and what is not. So the society out of which Jesus called people was mixed, racially, religiously. There were fanatics, there were liberals, there were radical monotheists, there were some who followed idolatry. It was mixed economically with rich and poor, educated and not educated, and to anyone who followed him, he gave them a new way to live. Walk this way. Now, I don't know about you, but at the moment, this is my confession, I am not nearly as good at actually following Jesus as I am talking about. But my faith is, my hope is, that if we could come together and help each other out, no matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargo, and I hope you're here next Sunday to hear Nadia. See you and be well.